Thomas knew the dead in one specific way. He knew the way the face changes after the muscles release, the settling that happens in the first hours, and how to work within that window. He knew the chemistry of preservation and the specific temperature differentials required to maintain it. He knew what the body becomes after the biological process stops and what to do about it, and the timeline within which each step needs to happen. He was good at this knowledge. His grandfather had started the business in 1958. His father carried it through 3 decades. Thomas had taken it over at 31 and run it for another 31 years after that. In 62 years of life, approximately 40 of them had been spent in close proximity to death. He did not believe anything came after it. Not from grief, not from hostility, from the specific, quiet certainty of someone who has worked directly adjacent to biological finality for decades. He had seen what remains. He understood what the process produces and what it doesn't. He was not afraid of dying. He was, if anything, familiar with it in a way most people never get to be. He told me this the way people tell you things they are no longer certain of, carefully, with the specific precision of someone who is making sure the old language is still available, even though it doesn't fit quite the same way it used to. His type A aortic dissection happened on a Saturday morning in October of 2021. Type A dissections involve the ascending aorta, the vessel that carries oxygenated blood directly from the heart to the rest of the body. When the inner wall of that vessel tears, blood forces itself between layers of the vessel wall. The tear propagates. Blood flow to vital organs is compromised. It is one of the most rapidly lethal cardiovascular events in emergency medicine. Without surgical intervention, mortality approaches 100% within 48 hours. Even with immediate surgery, it is a serious number. Thomas was 62 years old. No significant cardiac history. No known risk factors by any conventional measure. He had been making coffee in his kitchen on a Saturday morning when he felt something he later described as a tearing sensation in his chest. Sharp, central, specific, nothing like any discomfort he had previously experienced. He told me, I knew within the first 30 seconds that this was not something I could wait out. He made it to his phone before he lost consciousness. The paramedics reached him in 7 minutes. His blood pressure was not obtainable on arrival. He went into ventricular fibrillation during transport. The surgical team had been notified prior to arrival. He was in the operating room within 26 minutes of the paramedics reaching him. 5 minutes and 43 seconds of cardiac arrest, ventricular fibrillation transitioning to asystole, before the surgical team achieved return of spontaneous circulation on the operating table. He woke up in the cardiac ICU 2 days later. When he contacted me, through this channel's contact form, approximately 8 months after his discharge, his message was 4 sentences. He said, I spent 31 years as a funeral director. I prepared bodies for burial. I did not believe in anything after death. I need to tell someone what I found. I called him back that afternoon. He didn't begin with the experience. He began with what he had expected to find, because that is what makes the experience worth telling. He had spent 3 decades working in intimate proximity to what death produces. He had a framework, not a fearful one, just a practical one, for what happened when the process stopped. He was not constructed for a life review or a tunnel of light. He was constructed for the specific, professional understanding that the body concludes, and what follows is a series of practical arrangements on behalf of the living. What he was not constructed for was being wrong. He separated from his body immediately. He described it the way people do when they have no dramatic investment in the telling, as a fact, not as a miracle. He was above. He could see the paramedic running compressions, the interior of the ambulance, his own face. And he noticed, without being able to account for why he noticed it, a smudge on the left lens of his glasses, which were still on his face. He had seen it that morning while getting dressed and thought vaguely about cleaning them. From above, looking down, he could see it clearly on the left lens. That is the kind of detail I hold on to. Not the peace or the light, which were also present and which he described in due course. The smudge on the left lens of his glasses. Then there was a space. He used the word space, and then corrected himself, and said environment, and then said that neither word was precise. It had presence. Warmth in the way that the quality of air has warmth, not in the way a heated room has warmth. And there were people in it. People he had prepared for burial. Not all of them. Not a catalog of 31 years arranged in some kind of inventory. Specific individuals. He recognized some immediately. Community members he had also known in life. People from Eugene whose families had come through the funeral home across 2 generations. For those, recognition was immediate and uncomplicated. But some of them he had not known in life. He had known them in one specific context. He had known them the way his profession required. Not as people in the full sense of that word. As the cases that arrived through a particular door, under particular circumstances, within a particular professional arrangement. In that space, he recognized them anyway. He could not account for this clinically. He spent the first several months after his discharge trying to construct an explanation that fit within his professional framework, and he could not. The recognition was not based on the knowledge he had of them from his work. It preceded that knowledge. It operated on a different kind of information than the kind he had spent 31 years accumulating. There was a woman he called Clara. He did not know her name in the experience. He came to call her that in our conversations because he needed something to call her, and Clara was the name of a great aunt he had been fond of as a child, and there was something in the quality of the presence that reminded him of that fondness. He had no conscious memory of preparing Clara's body. He could not place her among the specific cases he remembered from his career. He knew in the experience that he had encountered her through his work. That was part of the quality of the recognition, like knowing someone's name without being able to remember where you heard it. But he had no story attached to her. No family, no service date, no particular detail from the preparation. What he had was this. She touched her left earlobe with the tips of 2 fingers. He described it as a habitual gesture. Not a nervous one, something more settled than that. The way people touch something familiar when they're thinking or paying close attention or considering something carefully. The gesture of someone who has done this 10,000 times without knowing they were doing it. He described it to me in our first conversation the same way he described the smudge on his glasses, as a detail. Something he noticed. Something with no narrative function, no emotional purpose, no reason to be there except that it was there. I spent 3 weeks after our first conversation trying to locate Clara. Thomas's administrative records were organized with the precision you would expect from someone who had spent 31 years managing the documentation of death. The name was not there. He had only the quality of the recognition and the gesture. But he was able to narrow the time frame based on impressions he could not fully explain. Something about the quality of the encounter that he associated with a particular period in his professional life. Late 2010s, he thought. Possibly 2016 or 2017. I reviewed the records from those years. One family from out of state fit the circumstances. A service in late 2016. A woman in her early 70s. A daughter listed as next of kin. I tracked the daughter down through 2 intermediary calls. She agreed to speak with me by phone. I did not describe the gesture first. I asked her to tell me about her mother. Within the first 15 minutes of the conversation, without any prompting from me, she mentioned it. She said her mother had a tell. She said, whenever Mom was really thinking or really listening to something carefully, she would touch her left ear with 2 fingers, just the tips. She said it drove her father crazy in a fond way. He could always tell when her mother was genuinely paying attention versus just being polite, because the earlobe gesture was involuntary. She said she still catches herself doing it sometimes, and when she notices, she thinks of her mother. Thomas had prepared this woman's body in 2016. He had no interaction with her in life. He had no conscious memory of the case at the time he described the experience to me. He described an idiosyncratic, habitual, involuntary physical gesture that the woman's daughter confirmed, without prompting, as one of her mother's defining expressions. Pim van Lommel is a Dutch cardiologist who spent decades studying what happens to consciousness during cardiac arrest. His prospective study, published in The Lancet in December of 2001, not a fringe publication, not a supplement, the most widely read clinical medical journal in the world, followed 344 cardiac arrest patients across 10 Dutch hospitals over 8 years. 62 of them, 18%, reported near-death experiences. The experiences were richly detailed, internally consistent, and stable under follow-up interview conducted at 2 years and again at 8 years. Van Lommel found that no physiological, pharmacological, or psychological factors could account for why some patients reported experiences and others did not. His interpretation was careful and precise. He was not making a theological claim. He was making a scientific observation that in a significant subset of these patients, consciousness appeared to be functioning during a period when the brain, by every conventional neurological measure, was not. Sam Parnia spent years at institutions, including the University of Southampton and Weill Cornell, studying what he called the boundary of death. His AWARE study, published in the journal Resuscitation in 2014, involved 2,060 cardiac arrest patients across 15 hospitals worldwide. Among the findings, one validated case of accurate veridical perception during a 3-minute period of complete cardiac arrest, a period in which the patient should not have been capable of any sensory experience whatsoever. One rigorously verified case in a large, prospectively designed study. Parnia's framing, like Van Lommel's, is precise and careful. Not a claim about the metaphysical meaning of these experiences. A claim about what the data requires, that the question of consciousness at the boundary of death deserves systematic scientific investigation because the data does not allow us to dismiss it. Thomas's case sits in the same category. The smudge on the left lens of his glasses seen from above. The gesture of a woman whose body he had prepared 6 years earlier, confirmed by her daughter as one of her mother's most defining involuntary expressions. The recognition that operated on knowledge he did not have in any conventional sense. I need to tell you about something that happened to me about 6 weeks after my own surgery in 2019. I drove to the hospital where I had worked for 22 years, and I sat in the medical library for most of an afternoon. I had heard of Van Lommel's study years earlier, the way you hear of things that exist at the edge of your clinical lane. I had filed it as fringe. I had never actually read it. I found the physical copy of The Lancet, volume 358, December 2001. I read the abstract. I read the study. I read it again. I had spent 22 years in an ICU choosing clinical language to close conversations about what dying patients were trying to describe to me. I had used the phrase, the brain shutting down, as a professional tool, deliberately, because it was efficient, and it ended the conversation, and it allowed the shift to continue. I had handed dying people a diagnosis when they were trying to hand me something for which they did not have words. And there I was, 6 weeks out of a cardiac arrest, in a library in Portland, reading a peer-reviewed study in a journal I had been reading since my residency. A study that said 18% of cardiac arrest survivors report structured, coherent, stable experiences that cannot be accounted for by hypoxic confabulation. That includes, in some cases, verifiable information about events occurring during the period of clinical death. Published in The Lancet in 2001. The study had been there for 18 years while I told patients their brains were shutting down. I sat with that for a long time. Thomas went back to work after his recovery. He still runs the funeral home. The work is the same: the care, the precision, the management of what remains, the service to the families who need it. What has changed is the quality of his attention in the rooms where he works. He said, "I used to think I was alone in those rooms. I don't think that anymore." He is not making a theological claim. He told me specifically that he does not know what the experience was or what it means at the level of physics or philosophy or theology. He has not joined anything. He has not changed what he eats or how he votes or how he talks to his grandchildren. What he has changed is the interior quality of what he does in those rooms, the understanding that the cases he receives are not the whole of what they were. He said, "I prepared 900 people for burial, believing they were finished. I do not think that anymore. If you are sitting with a loss right now, if you found this channel because someone you loved died and you need to know whether they are simply gone, I cannot give you certainty. Thomas cannot give you certainty. Neither can Van Lommel or Parnia or anyone else who has spent a career at this question. What I can tell you is what Thomas found in 5 minutes and 43 seconds on an operating table in Eugene, Oregon. They were there. Not as the cases he had managed, not in the specific context of his work, not reduced to what he had known of them from the one angle his profession had given him, as themselves. Whole in whatever way that space allows for wholeness. And one of them was touching her earlobe, the same way she had touched it 10,000 times in life without knowing she was doing it. Thomas said he only knew her from one direction. What he found was that there was another direction. And from that direction, she was entirely herself. If you are a nurse or a paramedic or a hospice worker or a funeral director or anyone who has spent professional time adjacent to the end of life, and if you have wondered what remains of the people you have cared for or prepared or tried to save, I want to leave you with what Thomas's case suggests. Whatever you knew of them from your side of the work, there was more of them than that. He said, I should have known. I was the one who understood that what I received was not the whole of what they were. I just didn't know what the rest of it looked like. Now he does. And the smudge he would need to clean off the left lens of his glasses, he's gotten around to it now. He said it seemed important afterward.